Steph and I have been meeting since January this year, approximately every 2 weeks or so on a Thursday, but we've not yet met in person. We met originally in December at an online event, a symposium, which was Touch Reflections on Making, that was organised by CFPR Research Associate Sophie Boones. And I think Steph had in her bio, it said knit and stitch. And I thought, I want to speak to that person. She seems really interesting and get to know her better. So after being asked by Karina Paraman, who's the director of the Centre for Fine Print Research, to do this session, I really wanted to think about how Steph and I could organise it. So rather than having a reflective conversation on our practice for 30 minutes or so, we thought it was really important to have an authentic voice that would give you some kind of time sensitivity as to what we've all been going through over this past year. So we've recorded our conversations and then we've made a film and we put together elements of our conversations. It's 32.5 minutes long. So I hope you enjoy this screening and we'll have a Q&A afterwards. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen now.
So you sent me a link to an in conversation with Edmund Duval and Theasta Gates, and I watched that. One of the things that we were both interested in was that Japanese tradition of mending pottery with gold, usually with gold, and kind of identifying a mend as something, a part of the creative process that was still present, but also incorporating that into the aesthetic of the piece. And we were sort of talking before about mending and kind of that idea of how does that fit with us within this past year,
with coming into your own space and almost all your focus being about your space. And so the things that surround you are more prevalent, and almost that kind of the rise of decorators, redecorating houses and kind of doing the DIY, and also, yeah, kind of ordering things and sorting out things. And I know, yeah, so many people have kind of sorted out almost like their wardrobes and had bags of things to go to, but no charity shops to take them to. But still, it's that kind of actually, again, looking inside and kind of feeling that a lot of it in my studio was actually seeing what was here. And I think because I couldn't almost imagine the future, I found it difficult to make work for it. And so therefore I was going back to the pieces I had and looking at actually, again, either finishing them or even trying to, you know, if they hadn't worked, to sort of piece them back together, kind of rework them in new ways. That was, again, a lot of that because they'd almost been made. So it was like a mending process, but it was just to kind of reconfigure them. And yeah, and I think especially when you've got projects on and you have lots of ideas and lots of almost samples of possibilities, and some of them take off and others don't, and it is almost those ones that didn't make the final cut, and sometimes going back to those.
So were they things that you almost didn't feel so precious about, in that sense that you felt that you could kind of re-engage with them and not remake them, but as you say, kind of almost mend them in some ways to become something else?
Yes, and it was and actually the things that they became were often things for me and for my household, that it was that actually almost, yeah, kind of really sort of taking them in, and in some senses actually that kind of went with actually the amount of time I'd spent on it as well. And so I was doing processes that were really kind of labor intensive, that took a long time to do. And that kind of almost, I think if it was something kind of outside, I consider how it related to other people and this much. It was really about how it related to me a lot more, and actually thinking that I wouldn't take it out. Yeah.
One thing we also talked about was that the idea of a cyclical nature over the course of a year of artistic practice.
I think it was almost a couple of months ago when we started talking, and we were talking about almost what we were doing now, and it was, we were both almost in a place of not being creative, and it was within a lockdown, and so there was an element of going, is this stifling my creativity? But also kind of recognizing that actually within the winter it's almost actually I would work a lot and be very creative up to kind of like Christmas. And because there'd be lots of things, people would be going out and about, and you do lots of things up to Christmas. And then after Christmas, I found I'd always have a month or two where I wasn't almost, it felt like I'd not quite burnt myself out, but I'd been really creative and then I wasn't. But what I did do is I loved to take on board kind of new processes, or go and learn new things, or go and explore something else. And so I've realized that it was that actually, whilst being so totally in my work, that almost went up to really intensive kind of December period. I'd then almost actually then put those things away and just play and bring in new things. And sometimes those things would help me to analyze what it was I was doing. So it could be, something really totally unrelated. So even just kind of, it could be that I work with fabrics and I'd go and work with paper or clay or kind of metal. But then that actually really, when I struggled with it because it wasn't doing what I wanted it to do, I then understand a better almost what I was doing with my materials. And but also it just gave me, because it wasn't central to my work, I could, it was more lighthearted. There wasn't so much pressure on it being really good, and that would really again revamp. And I think sometimes as well, part of that was almost putting away those pieces of work and tidying the studio of all of that work. And that kind of almost got me back in touch with the items I've made, the things I had, but also pushing away, seeing the things that were still in the drawer, as it were. And again, kind of opening up possibilities again.
Yeah.
Reorganizing your studio, I remember.
Yes, I think it's that, like you said, getting in touch with the materials and equipment that you have just by handling them, reorganizing them, is a really good experience that we don't have to be making all the time. That activity, it's not all consuming so much as that things filter down, and it's actually quite restorative, and you're almost kind of, it's not repair, but you're allowing yourself other types of engagement. As you say, you've done it in a way of maybe using different materials or doing a course that kind of makes you reframe your practice in order to then develop it and move on.
I think sometimes when we work with a particular field or with a particular kind of material, often I often feel like I fell into this. It was almost like it just happened that I didn't make any decisions that this is what I would do. It almost felt like, well, I wasn't particularly great at anything else, kind of thing. And I just ended up doing this. Whereas actually, I think when you do engage with other things and you just go, no, actually, there's something I have a very particular kind of sensitivity to the materials I work with and to the subjects that I explore. And actually, even though it felt like I was falling, I was really focused. It was always almost a definite choice to do this.
Yeah.
And it is, again, that sort of affirmation sometimes.
Yeah.
Really good.
I think you're bringing your knowledge to that moment, aren't you? And I think sometimes it reminds me of being at art school, and the tutor would like the drawing that took me 10 minutes to do, and the one that I've slaved over hours and hours was, you know, kind of brushed over or pushed aside. But then what I had to learn in my own self was all those hours of drawing went into that 10-minute drawing beforehand. So all of that knowledge, like I say, you're subsuming everything, and then it can be focused into that moment. Going back, I guess, to the cyclical nature of artistic practice and mending as well, that how much energy it takes to make, and that's why sometimes you just can't turn on your creativity. Everything needs to come together, and that idea that there needs to be those natural pauses, or those times for reinvigoration, and those intensive making times. When the nights draw in, there's that natural want to draw back a bit, and maybe bring a difference in scale, perhaps. I don't know if you feel that, the kind of things getting smaller and more close to your body.
The last year it has, kind of, definitely. And I think, there's been, yes, elements where the scale comes down, and whether that's also because of the framing of the computer screen as well. Almost everything is on this really little kind of scale in front of you, and the home is very much in focus. That no matter how great your kind of daylight bulb is not going to be the same as a full day of sunlight.
Do you do that as well? Do you kind of work? Do you work with sunlight as much as you can?
All of my major decisions are done with sunlight, because I know how much the light changes the color of things, and even though a lot of the time, because I'm looking at texture, I work with really kind of neutral colors within my work, but still there's those kind of nuances of those colors going together. I feel that has a really important element to them. Again, everything needs to balance, and I know that if I do anything inside at night, then it's not, the colors are going to just look wrong in the daytime, and so I do tend to step back from that. But I do actually, in the summer, in the middle of the summer, almost at the height of the summer, I always have almost like a couple of months maybe where I explore color, and and it's almost like my little antidote to working just with these neutral tones and texture, is I just pull out all of my lamb's wool yarns and piece them together and look at pattern and color, and I knit scarves. And there's usually about 9 different colors in the scarves, and a whole load of different patterns as well. And it just is putting those colors together that I just adore. And even though it's the middle of summer, and the idea of wearing a scarf is just the most ridiculous thing to consider because it is so hot, but actually it is that exploration that just feeds me, really. And then almost I can do that for a couple, and then go back to monotone, and really look into texture. Last summer, and because often again it was like making things for the future, and I couldn't quite see it. So actually, what colours were right for this situation, for now, seemed really odd. But then I started, again, the more I worked with it, the more it started to kind of explore kind of where I was and how I was feeling through my work. And I ended up actually, I think nearly all of my scarves I sent to friends, because it was actually, it felt like, we'd been separated for a long time and almost felt like there's no end to it. And then it was just that thing of going, well, I know it's the middle of summer and I'm sending you a wool scarf, but actually, one day you will want to wear it. The year goes round, that will come into winter, you want to wrap up warm, but also we'll come out of this and we will get to meet up again, sort of thing. And just in that, sending out a bit of hope for, that the year will kind of move round. And I've done a couple of collaborations with this artist, Sarah Parsons, and actually we did our MA together at UWE. And she is an artist and she works in many different medium. And actually one of her key interests is the tactile nature. And actually when she's creating something, how that includes a tactile kind of feature within it. So we talked about, actually, again, I was doing small kind of teacups and other ceramic pieces. And so we sort of talked about maybe if she created ceramic structures and then I could wrap and kind of work into those structures. And actually if I lift this up, there is now actually I kind of put things at the bottom. So sorry, it's quite heavy. It's as a process, it was really lovely because there was quite a back and forwards of ideas that she would create shapes and bring them to me, and then I would start to think about how to actually work into it. And I think one thing was about not wanting to cover up the wonderful textures that were in the ceramics. And actually, so then sort of thinking about actually, and then how, within spaces of kind of wrapping or then gaps that came through. And I would start to then sort of add sort of crochet and kind of work onto it and then share that with Sarah. And then she would make another kind of shape and sort of bring that, so that we were actually almost like a game of consequences.
And did you find that quite easy to do, or because it's quite, it is quite a large piece, and being kind of given it and then responding to it, did you have sort of ideas in mind, or did you kind of just sit with it for a while? How did you decide to respond?
I did sit with them for quite some time, and I actually tried things out and then took them off. And actually that aspect of the textiles is you can actually kind of put things on and then just sort of cut a few threads and take it off again and try a different thing.
So it's like a body, isn't it, almost, of trying something out on, taking it off, altering it, and then fitting it again.
Yes, and I think also because it was going to be one of a series, I think there wasn't the pressure in some ways that it had to be 100% sort of perfect and right and do everything that I wanted to do. It was still, almost, there was hopefully an element of that experimentation that would sort of take us forward.
And how many did you end up producing, Steph?
Made 3. Yeah.
And are they all very different, or I mean, is in like size and scale with each other, or do they kind of fit together as a trio?
Yes, I think this is the largest one, but the others were only a tad smaller. Although that itself had kind of implications on the firing, because they were too large for the kiln to do a final firing. So I think there's still an element to go. But then I'm sort of fascinated with I think another thing that we thought of as a possibility was actually how within the firing process, if there were kind of textiles or if there were other fibers that were kind of worked into a wet clay or a finished clay and then fired, how that might be kind of almost kind of imprinted, will it have an effect? Again, I think sometimes there's like a chemical effect, and I quite like the idea of almost my textile pieces disappearing but having almost an echo that would sit onto the ceramics.
Yeah, that sounds exciting to try.
The first one was very much set on the shape of a pot, and then as I'd actually kind of almost kind of wrapped and started to kind of bring these lines up, then Sarah herself actually started to almost bring the ceramics up. And also, yeah, there's, you know, she's actually scarring in kind of lines into pieces as well, so that itself could give me almost a channel to run things through, but also you know, an underlining.
That's interesting, almost suggesting for each other, creating a possibility there, and whether you take that up or not is then up to you, isn't it? Within that, in our conversations before, we've talked about care and repair, and I wondered if through your work over time, whether there's possibilities of drawing strips together or changing them in some way.
Yes, and I was thinking actually there are, my wall. so again, this is one piece that I had outside, and again it's lots of the kind of long strips, and they would actually kind of move, and they were almost like a curtain, so that the wind would kind of move them independently, and there'd be a real kind of record of this. But it did mean that there were areas that then got snagged on plants. And there were some roses kind of nearby, and so when I did take the installation down, there were areas that were kind of had holes in them, and so I did go through, and I have kind of started to kind of patch the holes. And
did you, sorry to interrupt, did you see that initially as were you a bit despairing of it, that all the work that you put in, and then, you know, the wind and nature had kind of ruined it a little bit for you, or did you see it as an opportunity and feel quite free about it?
Yes, and I think that was one of the things that I wanted to see, because the sun had bleached the colours, I mean really slightly, but there are elements where it does get paler. Oh, there's a piece there with a nice hole that I haven't mended yet. But so the idea that the weather would also have an impact onto the materials, so whether that was about wearing them out, whether it was about fading the color, or even so I was quite open to see what would happen to the piece within a place over time. And so then kind of getting to be able to work back into it was, I thought, as again a response to that wear and tear, and then having that as a record on the piece, so that I could place it somewhere else, but it would have this memento of a different place.
And as you said before, you mentioned the word echo, which I think is really nice way of kind of contextualizing your work, is that there are various echoes that happen where there'll be a residual experience that's imbued within the piece, and so therefore that's kind of left up to the viewer looking maybe at that piece of work in a different space to think about possibilities, isn't it, of what's happened in the life of that fabric, that piece of work.
Yes, and it comes, I think for me it comes from it's almost actually the second-hand sort of clothing trade, actually, way back in history when we didn't throw garments away. Actually, once they come to the end of their life with us, then they would be kind of, you'd sell them on, you'd pass them over. And within that sort of rag trade, they had almost the terminology of how worn out a garment was actually how many memories that garment held. So if it had a lot of worn elbows and collars, then it held a lot of memories. And I love that idea of that it was the memory of the person and their wearing the garment and their activities, and it was that minutiae of life that just kind of picked away at a garment and left its mark. And even the crease in the elbow, that would be the elbow of that person, that one person, and passing it on and for somebody else to wear. They might feel that the crease, the arm bent in the wrong place, or there was I was going to say, whether if somebody carried a bag or keys or something in a particular place, and that would wear itself, and if you weren't putting those garments together, you would notice the absence of something to where that's worn. So
that's fascinating, isn't it? I think the same with books, and you see some kind of life, but also there's like the metadata of a book and what it's been through. Reading a book, the experience is different every time, and that's something that I find quite difficult about reading digitally. Is that experience is the same every time, whereas if you've read a book, you will actually, the materiality will form a narrative as well of that handling, whereas with a digital device it behaves the same every time. I think that that's something that relates to both of our practice, in that we're trying to kind of uncover those narratives, if you like, and put them out there, but also to make new ones because of the work being out there. I think, like, I've just got this book here which is a new one, and it's Japanese ply, so it's 2 sheets of Japanese ply and a concertina book, but it's a collaborative book. So what we've done is actually left a little residue there of carved finger marks where you would hold the book, but I kind of think over time you'll probably get the grease out of people's fingers who look at it, and it will color the wood and change it. So I quite enjoy the idea of books changing over time with handling, and I think a book needs to be handled to be understood. Having someone interact with it actually gives you so much more information than just looking.
Yes. And I like the way that your imprints are almost in the act of taking it off the shelf. There's so much potential, that it is about, I'm about to discover something new.
Yes,
there is. Yes, because I was talking the other time about how in the summer I tend to actually then knit and play with color, and I thought I'll bring out one of my pieces, and so there is that. Actually, I put it all together because it kind of runs over kind of all the time. So there is that, just exploring, and it's about the colors working together, the weighting of each color next to each other. So actually having this tiny bit of a wonderful sort of magenta-y purple, and then and then just tonal kind of yellows, and almost like an acidy yellow through to kind of warm, kind of I was going to say spicy sort of colors. So just one of a kind of a variety of range of colors, just to prove that I do have color in my life.
We believe you. We believe you. But yes, you were saying though, particularly that specific time in summer, though, when you do work with colour, and I think that's interesting that there is a time of year because of the light and conditions, and also thinking ahead as well of what you produce at what time of year and what you're thinking about. And I love that within a practice that it does have a cycle. It's sometimes we don't necessarily realize it, but through our conversations, think that there's been lots of things that have really started to kind of come up to the surface for me in considering certain aspects about work that I hadn't before, and also how you talk about your work and how you feel about it too, because they're objects that you would normally touch. There's that relationship already, and I think the same with my work, because they're books, they're something that you would naturally touch anyway, or want to touch. And so there's not so much resistance in that sense of to other art forms that there might be, where traditionally that we're kind of told you can look but don't touch. There's a natural compulsion within us to share our work, but also that tactility within our practice is something that we want the audience to engage with too.
Yes, yeah, very much so. I think from again, that history and of the kind of the ages of our kind of activities, that is about actually really interacting, and then actually now kind of almost going forward. And there is an element of kind of moving into the kind of like the white cube, where there is the unwritten rule of you don't touch the artwork, you respectfully look at it from afar, to then going into the virtual realm, where there isn't that possibility of being to sneak a little finger out and just kind of think about what it feels like. But then again, coming up to the idea of how do you communicate that, how do you kind of work that, and that I think gives you a different lens to look through.
Yeah,
looking at your work,
definitely.
What will touch. I do have my little sustainable kind of step on my shoulder, which is actually just thinking about how actually the valuing of objects and materials, and actually if we do have an element of going, well, I can see things online, I can interact, I can understand and appreciate things on screen, but actually the things that I have around me, things I bring into my world, if I know that they do have an added kind of element that I relate to in the tactile, then that is going to be something that has more value in my life, and I'm less likely to throw it away and want to absorb a new thing. And so in part of me is hoping that what will happen is that, as well as having better technology, we will then really value the things that we consume.
Okay, thank you. Can I invite Steph back on screen?
Hello.
Hello. So I'm just going to check in the chat, Steph, to see if we have any questions here. So I'd just like to know before, as I'm scrolling through, because we would have normally met today and had our conversation, in reflecting on on our kind of conversations throughout since January. Is there anything that you're particularly thinking of at the moment in light of having a look at our film?
I've actually, I think there is an element, like, you know, at the beginning we're talking about actually that cyclical nature to the year, and the winter being quite a reflective time to you know, kind of think about the processes that we do, but also maybe thinking about what's important to us. And again, with lockdown, there's a lot of ideas of, you know, what do we do because just we do it, and what is actually important things to do. And I think it is starting to actually build back into my interests and the things I want to do, and actually, yeah, what are the things I want to focus on, and yeah, really kind of underlining, and yeah, that kind of tactile nature, and not being too distracted by the other things that come along. And what about you? Have you got anything after looking through the film?
I think it's made me really reflective on how I found it really valuable to look at those conversations again with making the film, into where we were at those times, because we recorded so much more footage. I've gone through hours and hours of footage, which has been great in that sense of reliving conversations and how we felt, and where you know, with making, with the creativity, and how all of these events have actually impacted on that. There's been a really interesting kind of line of activity, non-activity, reflection, etc., that I've found. And also, you've been a constant in my life for every 2 weeks since January. So even though if I haven't felt very good about things or very creative, I know that Thursday at 11 o'clock we're going to have a chat, and so it makes me think differently in knowing that that's going to happen. There's a question here from Karina. Steph, is there something inspiring about a muted palette for winter and a saturated palette for summer? I love your hot pink and orange scarves.
Oh, thanks, Karina. Yeah, I think that again was something that, because it was always part of that sort of cycle, that it would often be that I would kind of sort of create these things and just jump, and again falling into it, that was just the thing I did. And it would often be towards almost like Christmas presents, and so that there was that, you know, actually in the summer making things for Christmas. But like you say, I think there is something about that in the height of that saturation of colour, and just actually the world, and I think especially at the moment with all the rain, everything is just kind of getting all the colour in, sort of the greens of the grasses and the colours of all the flowers are coming out. Just feeling bombarded, and just seeing those colours as they go to each other, and then later on in the year, as the colours start to fade, then it is probably something that I'm more in tune to the textures and the subtleties of these materials next to each other within the world. And yeah, and as the sun loses its intensity in some ways, then it is other things that really come to the fore.
Thank you. Davina says, I think your observation, Steph, is that it's important to acknowledge what we have particular sensitivity to in terms of materials and processes speaks to me.
Thank you, Davina. Yes.
So there's
I see
some
your work as well. I know Davina's work, and I think I really see that in your work as well. Great.
Thank you. So there's one more question here just before we finish. Do you think the experience you had will be different if you had met face to face? Did the digital medium influence the focus of the conversations?
Shall I let you answer that first?
I think that was from Sophie. So I think it's really important to sort of say that was the only way we could meet, and we're yet to meet in person anyway. But I think it did, yes. But we talked a lot, and maybe a lot more about touch and about touching things, and also discussing how we would then go from a kind of physical to a more hybrid presentation of work, how we can do that. That's something that this time I think has made us really reflect on together, is thinking about how we can communicate all of that haptic experience through our practice in all different, using all different types of technologies. So we're at 1:15. Hopefully we'll get to have a cup of tea at UE soon, Steph, and I can meet you, and I'm probably allowed to give you a hug now as well, so that would be great. Thanks everyone, and mostly Steph for doing this with me, to Sophie Boons for our tech support. Thanks Sophie. Thanks everyone for coming, and hopefully see you soon in the next printing conversation. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
If anyone wants to hang on, I don't think we'll get cut off, but yes, if you want to hang on and talk to us personally, you're welcome. There's if you want to check the chat stuff, there's some thanks going on here, so thank you everyone. There's some really nice comments in here.
Yes, because I did also wonder about whether the fact that we were both in our studios when we were talking, whether that influenced us as well, just having that not being in a third place, not being in one or the other kind of spaces.
I think that's really interesting, Steph, like the idea that you're in your own little bubbles and connecting through this. I do wonder, it's very cool.
Yeah, it's how you use the screen, isn't it, Sophie, of thinking of how you show something. I love the way that Steph kind of rolled her scarf up to show. Whereas maybe if we'd met in person, she might have actually got out length and shown us, you know. So just that sort of small nuance of how do you present something when you're showing someone on screen, you know, was really interesting.
And the intimacy of the conversations, in a way, there's an intimacy there that maybe if you're in a school location or if you're in a cafe, or you just might not get that intimacy at the same level as you did, because you were both chatting from specific locations for you.
Exactly, and we've got to know, we've only known each other since January, you know, apart from meeting initially at your event. So in that sense, I think as we've got to know each other, and we thought in recording all of them, we would just get used to the record button being pressed, and showing people that being candid about practice, I think, is really important. People sometimes don't want to be presented with the work. They want to know your thoughts and feelings because they've gone into it, the good and the bad, and talking through that sort of more intimately, especially going through a pandemic, was really important to the conversation, I think.
And I think it was, there were elements of almost not doing work. It was the part of practice which wasn't about work as well, which I think is possibly something that isn't talked about so much. You don't talk about the, you know, almost like the writer's block, or that time when you can't get into something, or you're not wanting to get into something, or the bit in between one thing and another. Actually, again, tidying that part of that sort of process. And those, I think, our conversations have been really important because of this time, you know, where you're not so much out in the world physically doing things that we normally would, you know. I mean, I hope we can continue to chat, but you know, it's been a great opportunity to use a conversation in a different way when you are kind of faced with those challenges. So I could chat all day here, but I guess that we should stop now. Brenda says, I'm just going to use touching fabric as a theme for the next short film piece I'm working on. So yeah, that's brilliant, and you've replied to that. I will see that too. Is doing her PhD on sort of and her film practice. So then I was thinking, I'm sure she'll give us some good feedback on.
I remember actually Brenda, if it's the same Brenda Miller from years and years ago when I worked at Bolsboy University, so when she was doing a degree there. So it would be interesting to connect again. And oh, it is you from Bolsboy. You're here. Oh, lovely to see you, Brenda. Well, kind of not see you, but yes, see you on chat. That's really interesting. Usually there's a connection somewhere, isn't there, within a network of people. So yeah, I'll look forward to seeing your next film piece. Let me know. Okay, we should end it there, I guess, Steph. So I'll be in touch for our next session. And yeah, thanks to those people for hanging in there. And yeah, it was really nice to get some feedback on what we've been up to. Okay, I'll see you all soon. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Sophie. Bye.